Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
We got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to continue on our cloud security series. And if you missed our previous ones, we did a deep dive on Defender for servers. And we also have CSPM and CNAP fundamentals and foundations that are linked. We have a whole playlist in YouTube that is going to be dedicated to cloud security. Today, we're going to talk about Defender CSPM, or Cloud Security Posture Management, and we're going to do a deep dive on that. So first and foremost, Adam, can you tell our listeners what CSP?
Well, according to the definition you've written down here, Andy, in our show notes, Cloud Security Posture Management is the process of monitoring cloud-based systems and infrastructure for risks and misconfigurations.
Yes, and so by definition, it looks at how your systems are configured, mainly your cloud infrastructure. And that could be IaaS or PaaS or SaaS. And it'll look for misconfigurations and risk factors that you might have and alert you on those and hopefully help you mitigate them. A really easy example is something like having a public IP with a server that's assigned to a server and having RDP open, to be able to be connected. So something like that. That's not something that you want, or like an SMB share or an S3 bucket or something like that that's publicly accessible. These are things that CSPM should pick up on, ideally automate it to the point where it doesn't allow you to do that, but at least alerts you to let you know that, hey, you have this misconfigured resource out there. Let's fix it. So some of the key capabilities: using automation to make those corrections without any type of human involvement, monitoring, assessing, and managing, like we said, IaaS, SaaS, and PaaS platforms, including on-prem resources, which it can do, of course, hybrid cloud and multi-cloud environments. And so that's one of the capabilities, as you've been following along with our cloud security, our Defender for Cloud series, the solution that we have at Microsoft. And as a reminder, Adam and I do work for Microsoft. We work in our security sales organization, although this show is not sponsored by Microsoft, and we do this on our own time. But, when I say we, I mean Microsoft. This solution is vendor agnostic. It works for on-premise, it works for hybrid cloud, works for multi-cloud, GCP, AWS, and Azure. So it can, CSPM, a good CSPM program, and each one of these cloud vendors probably have their own. There's also third-party ones that will compete, but, we understand Defender CSPM. So from a general standpoint, CSPM stuff should help you identify this stuff. It should help you maintain policy. It should help you maintain and remediate any type of misconfigurations. In good CSPM solutions, it'll help you look at regulatory compliance mandates that you might have to comply with and help you pass those security requirements, and any other type of frameworks that you might have to comply with. And then finally, that automation and maybe any type of external scanning that will be a part of it to help you maintain that security posture. So to talk about Defender for Cloud and what it includes, we had done the Defender for Servers episode a couple weeks back, and Adam and I mentioned that as part of Defender for Cloud, you get a foundational CSPM solution. So this is anytime you have a resource like an Azure subscription, a GCP project, or an AWS account that you've connected to Azure and enabled the Defender for Cloud plan on it, foundational CSPM comes included. It's free. And there are certain things that come with it. So this is going to be for any type of resource that you've connected. It includes this foundational CSPM for free.
Andy,
security recommendations.
As you're going through things you connected, you forgot one other thing. Any resources you've onboarded with Azure Arc and have flowed now into the Azure control plane will also show up there. When Andy mentioned on-premises support, that's how you do it. You install the Azure Arc agent on, say, your on-premises Linux servers or Windows servers, and they will show up then as well.
Thanks for that call out, Adam. And that's very, very important because, that's one capability that actually I don't think our competitors have. Azure Arc is a fairly unique capability that allows you to extend visibility to Azure and monitor and secure those resources. So some of the things that are included in the foundational CSPM: security recommendations, any type of misconfigured security baseline. You have secure score, which measures how secure that resource is and things that you can do to increase that score. It has an asset inventory page, which includes anything that you've connected to that Defender for Cloud plan, and it will identify potential security issues and provide you with recommendations as well. Some things that are part of that asset page, that you can ask and find out are, for example, what machines you have that are tagged with production that might be missing the log analytics agent for collection of logs and monitoring. How many machines you have that have a specific tag that might have some outstanding recommendations that you need to remediate, or might have a known vulnerability, like using a specific CVE number. So the asset inventory page is extremely helpful in helping you figure out where, have visibility on all of your assets that are connected to the Defender for Cloud and figure out what you might need to do to secure that. Data exporting is included in that foundational CSPM. So you can easily, without any cost, export the data to Defender, XDR, or Sentinel with no additional cost, as well as any other third-party solutions via some native connectors and APIs. So if you need to export it to a SIM, even a third-party SIM, you can do that with no additional cost. Included in the foundational CSPM is something called the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. So if you don't know where to start, maybe you don't have a specific compliance framework that you want to go against, what's included is this cloud security benchmark. And that benchmark is basically something that Microsoft has come up, made up of multiple different things like Azure security benchmarks of other cloud providers like GCP or AWS, and then security benchmarks of other Microsoft clouds. And so we've mashed that all together to give you this Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark that you can look at and say, hey, does my environment meet this benchmark? And if not, what do I need to do to remediate it to make it more secure against this baseline? And then finally, one of the things I'll call out is workflow automation. And so if you want automated responses via Azure Logic apps, that's included with this foundational CSPM. You can trigger consumption logic apps on security alerts, recommendations, or any changes to regulatory compliance. So as an example, if you want to have Defender for Cloud email a specific user or security group when an alert happens, that's possible. So I'll take a pause here. Adam, do you have any comments on what we've discussed so far?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So what Andy's talking about, these foundational CSPM services, if you've been around the block, you may remember these being referred to as Azure Security Center, ASC, back in the day. This was also, I believe, shortly named Azure Defender before it became part of the Defender for Cloud brand. But this has actually been around for a while in Azure. The extension to AWS and GCP is a little newer, as is Azure Arc, although at this point, all of those are pretty mature as well. So this is a feature set that's been around for a while, really robust, really mature, and again, completely free. You don't have to buy anything to get this. You can just, if you have stuff in Azure, you can turn this on and start getting these recommendations. We certainly want our customers to be secure, and this is a great start. And that Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, the MCSB, a great first pass on looking for things that are out of place or opportunities to further harden your resources. Last thing I'll say, Andy mentioned Azure Logic apps. If you're not familiar with that, that's kind of the back end behind Power Automate, or what was previously known as Microsoft Flow. So if you like Flow, you like Power Automate, same idea. It's just more of a back end solution for back end processes, but it's insanely powerful. You can create all sorts of complex logic apps with it, and it's incredibly inexpensive. You pay literally like thousandths of a penny per steps or something like that to run it. So it's something you can dabble with without running up a huge bill. And you can even create workflows like Andy. I was at a Microsoft Technology Center last week, and the technical architect there was showing how he killed some sort of process on his PC, which generated an alert with our DSRE team, essentially the SOC. And there was a logic app that was built off of that alert that automatically sent an email to him and basically said, "Did you do this? Yes or no?" And he could click yes or no in the email. And the logic app was built that if he didn't take action X number of minutes, it would automatically isolate his machine. So you can do really cool stuff with this, where if it detects a certain alert that's so sensitive, you maybe could take that resource offline automatically, apply a network security group to it that's a deny all. You could do really clever stuff with this. So from a security engineering perspective, you can do really neat things with logic apps, and they're really inexpensive, and you can build them all off of these foundational CSPM alerts that are no cost. So you can do cool stuff here without running up a big bill. And just want to say, before we pivot to the next part, which is talking about Defender CSPM, which is a newer and paid product, we did not take anything in foundational CSPM and suddenly start charging money for it. Everything in Defender CSPM is net new engineering effort, new product, new capabilities that we decided would be a paid solution. But we certainly did not take anything, rip it away from people that had previously been free, and said, start paying us now. Just to be clear on that. So again, a great set of features here. You can avail yourself to them at no cost. Even if you're mostly on-prem, you can enroll all your servers in Azure Arc and still get this readout. Really powerful. Even if you're mostly in other clouds and you do less in Azure, your multi-cloud strategy, you can connect to GCP and AWS and get that visibility in here as well. So it really can be a one-stop shop for all of your security visibility across your IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS solutions.
So like Adam emphasized, everything that we've talked about so far up to this point is absolutely free. All you need to do is connect your Azure subscription, your AWS account, your GCP project, or onboard your on-prem servers via Arc, which is again also free, and then turn on Defender for Cloud. When you turn on Defender for Cloud, we talked about how Defender for Cloud is an umbrella of all these different other services that fall under it. Defender for Cloud is kind of like the overarching umbrella, and then underneath it, like a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Defender for Servers. That's specifically for servers, but it falls under the Defender for Cloud umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
Like part of CSPM, the foundational CSPM, falls under that Defender for Cloud. And so all you got to do is turn it on and nothing else, and you get the foundational CSPM for free, which is everything that we've talked about to this point. Now, like Adam said, there's a new solution called Defender CSPM, which we're going to go into now. And that is part of a paid subscription service. It's another solution that you have to purchase. But when you have things that are onboarded in Defender for Cloud, you'll see under the environmental settings that there's a Defender CSPM that you can turn on for that particular plan. Now, we talked about this in our Defender for Cloud series, where every subscription, just like with Defender for Servers, there's a plan 1 and plan 2. You have to, be on the same plan for that entire subscription. Same thing here. If you turn on CSPM for a specific resource like an AWS account and Azure subscription, it will cover that resource completely. You don't have to turn it on for each subscription. You can have Defender CSPM only on certain subscriptions, like a prod subscription, and then you have a dev subscription, which you don't have it turned on. But it is turned on for that entire subscription, that entire AWS account, that entire GCP project, so on and so forth. So you can't pick and choose resources from within and say, I only want this protected by CSPM and not anything else.
Great call out. And just one thing to add on here, because the use of subscription gets confusing. Azure subscriptions are, of course, a logical part of the Azure hierarchy of how things are separated and split up within Azure. However, like every Azure service, Defender CSPM is actually a pay-as-you-go service. It's billed per resource, and it might be like per resource per hour or something. I'm not quite clear on the details, but there is no long-term commitment is the bottom line. So this is something you can turn on. You will pay for it, but if you don't see value, you can turn it back off. You're not committed to having it on your enterprise agreement for 3 years or something like that. It doesn't work that way. And by the way, as far as how it's billed, it is per resource, and then different resources have different costs, I believe. It will give you an estimate before you turn it on. So it'll say you have this many resources in this subscription of types X, Y, and Z. We estimate your cost of using this will be X. So there's no surprises here, no surprise bills. It will be very upfront with what you potentially would pay to turn this on. So you can, if you're curious, you can go check that out. Just don't turn it on. Just go to the page where you would turn it on, and it will give you that estimate and provide that guidance for you. So, and your Microsoft account team has access to that as well, for the purposes of estimating as well. So if you also want to hit them up, you can do that, and they should be able to give you a pricing estimate as well.
So very similar to how Defender for Cloud is an umbrella, Defender CSPM is also an umbrella, because we often think of vulnerabilities or misconfigurations in servers, but again, I mentioned storage accounts or like S3 buckets. So it includes everything that's covered in that subscription or AWS account or GCP. If you have servers, if you have containers, if you have storage, if you have APIs. So Defender CSPM will give you alerts on any one of these that might be misconfigured. And so there are specific features of Defender CSPM, like once you enable it, you can go and turn on, which are some capabilities like agentless scanning for machines or agentless discovery of Kubernetes. And these, you have the option of doing scans of machines without having to rely on an agent being installed. They're done through APIs, and you can do that for both VMs and for Kubernetes, and alert on different misconfigurations for those resources. There's also agentless container vulnerability assessments. So if you're looking at the images that are stored within your container registries, sensitive data discovery, which automatically discovers any type of cloud managed data resources that are containing sensitive data at scale. And it uses an agentless smart sampling scanning and integrates with Microsoft Purview sensitive information types and labels. So when I'm mentioning all of these are little toggles within the Defender CSPM configuration once you go in and edit that you can turn these on and off for each one of these if you want. And then finally, there's permissions management insight in Defender CSPM. This is a fairly new capability. We mentioned it a few months back, but it is part of what we now call Entra Permissions Management, which is a cloud infrastructure entitlement management solution, or CIEM. And that's another whole set of capabilities, but we've taken some of those capabilities and included it in Defender CSPM. Not all of it, but some of it. So permissions management, Entra Permissions Management is a whole separately licensed CIEM solution. But what we've taken is, if you're a Defender CSPM customer and you're paying for that on a resource, you can look at permissions discovery for high-risk identities, including any type of over-permissioned identities or unused super identities within Azure, AWS, and GCP. So it'll take a look at privileged accounts that might be underutilized or over-permissioned, where they're not utilizing certain permissions. And you can also get access to what we call the permissions creep index, where, over time, permissions have been added on, privileged permissions have been added on to a certain identity over time and gotten, way over permissioned. So these are two capabilities that are just included in the Defender CSPM that are part of a much larger Entra Permissions Management solution, which was something that we had purchased a few years ago called CloudKnox. So if you're familiar with CloudKnox, that was a CIEM solution that we purchased and then rebranded, and now we call it Entra Permissions Management. So some capabilities, again, just kind of tossed in here in Defender CSPM. Another big thing that's included in Defender CSPM is DevOps security. And so this used to be something that was also separate, now just kind of rolled into this Defender CSPM. So you can connect your DevOps environments like Azure DevOps, GitHub, and GitLab. And it'll provide you with a ton of security features for your DevOps. You have the ability to look at, as soon as they're connected, it'll start configuring these scanners that will start scanning your DevOps resources that will look at your builds, your secure files, your viable groups, your service connections, your repos. And some security controls that are include like scoped secret access. So it'll help you minimize the exposure of sensitive information, reduce the risk of any type of unauthorized access. It'll look at restrictions of self-host runners and high permissions, enhanced branch protection. So it'll help you maintain the integrity of code by enforcing branch protection rules and preventing malicious code injection, and then optimizing your permissions and securing your repos by tracking the minimum base permissions and enabling secret push protection for repositories. It'll also look at your cloud configurations throughout development life cycles by enabling security for infrastructure as code templates and container images. And it'll also prioritize any type of remediation of critical issues in code. So when you're applying comprehensive code to cloud contextual insights, it'll help you prioritize the code fixes with pull request annotations and assigning developer ownership for triggering custom workflows directly into your developer tools. So again, this was something that was previously on its own called Defender DevOps Security or Azure DevOps Security, but now is rolled into this Defender for Cloud. And you can connect this at no additional cost. Continuing on to something else that, again, we're just tossing into this Defender CSPM. We have another solution that's called External Attack Surface Management. And it's a separately licensed solution that, remind me, Adam, we purchased it from, I believe, RiskIQ.
That was part of RiskIQ, yes.
So RiskIQ, which is our threat intelligence, they had two different solutions there. They had threat intelligence, and then they had this external attack surface management.
Mm-hmm.
And what external attack surface management does is it continually scans all of your external resources to give you kind of a view of what attackers might see. So it's scanning your domains, your host names, your web pages, your IP blocks, SSL certificates, so on and so forth, to see if any of those are being misused or compromised. Again, that is a whole separate thing, but we've taken some of those capabilities and tossed it into Defender CSPM. Specifically, attack path analysis, where it's looking at any type of exploitable path starting from internet exposed IPs. We're able to discover all of the internet facing cloud resources through the use of an outside scan, and then any type of custom queries that correlate all internet exposed IPs with the rest of Defender for Cloud data in the Cloud Security Explorer. So it's just taking a piece of what it can see from the outside, integrating that, and then really rolling it into this next capability called attack path analysis. And we're just going to dive right in because attack path analysis is one of the coolest parts of the Defender CSPM solution as a whole. It basically lets you look at immediate threats from an attacker's point of view on how they can exploit your environment based on that specific misconfiguration or CVE or vulnerability. And it'll highlight any type of recommendations that you need to do to resolve that from actually happening. All the attack paths are organized by their risk level, and that is determined by a contextual aware risk prioritization engine that considers the risk factor of each resource that's available within that attack path. So really easy to use. When you go to it, it'll tell you the riskiest thing that you have and how an attacker would use your misconfigurations and vulnerabilities today as it stands to compromise a high-risk resource. And then it gives you recommendations on how to remediate that. So super important.
Andy, take a break. You just covered a lot of material here in Defender CSPM. Obviously, some of the add-ons over time have been really nice. The CloudKnox acquisition with CIEM and building some of that permissions management into Defender for Cloud, the Risk IQ acquisition with the external attack surface management, baking that intelligence in and using that to highlight attack paths that leverage external IPs. So you can see, okay, here's where an attack could start and here's where they could go on just that entry point. Very powerful. Defender for DevOps was that the former name of the thing that's baked in, or is that something else? Yeah, okay. So Defender for DevOps being baked in, helping you build that confidence in your repositories, in your build process, in the code you're writing, all of those things, hugely beneficial as well. And then that doesn't even get into all the things we talked about, like the agentless scanning for machines and Kubernetes and container vulnerability assessments. And then even the integration with the Microsoft Purview platform. If you've gone to the work of standing up a taxonomy of classifications and you're actually labeling documents, and those can be detected. Say, hey, look, this Azure Blob Storage has a whole bunch of stuff labeled highly confidential. You should know about that. Maybe you should take some action. So that's really, really helpful. And what was the other thing I was going to call out? Oh, and attack path analysis. I mean, you touched on all the highlights there, but just how it prioritizes it. So we're always lacking time in what we do as security defenders. So knowing where to spend our time, super valuable.
Yeah, and the Defender for DevOps, or the part that's in this portion of CSPM, it's really primarily for that infrastructure as code, or code to infrastructure type environment where you're looking at specifically the pipeline and not necessarily the code itself. I've had a few customers ask me about, like, can you do fuzzing or can you do dynamic code analysis? And that's more part of GitHub security,
right?
Which, GitHub is a completely different portion of Microsoft. It is owned by Microsoft, but it is on its own. And then that is where they do more of that code analysis of, like, do you have SQL injection vulnerabilities or anything like that? And they do the dynamic code analysis and fuzzing. But this is more of, looking at permissions and looking at, do you have exposed secrets? Do you have, out of date libraries, things like that, versus like the actual code itself and how it would run. The final thing that I will highlight, which is probably one of the biggest things that is included in Defender CSPM, is additional regulatory compliance. And so if you fall under any type of regulatory compliance and you need help identifying issues that are preventing you, or just having insight into the specific controls that your resources will map against, this is what you need in order to help you achieve that standard or that compliance certification. So a lot of different regulatory compliance frameworks that are included in this. I'll just give a few examples. I'm guessing the majority of listeners will probably fall under one of these, but like HIPAA, HITRUST, ISO 27001, CMMC, FedRAMP, PCI DSS, SOC 2, GDPR, NIST. I had a customer that was looking for the Australian government ISM protected. That's included in this. AWS foundational security practices, CIS controls, CCPA, so on and so forth. So there are a ton. And that's just a few of them. But pretty much any type of major compliance framework is included in this, and you can map your resources that fall under your Defender for Cloud, your Defender for CSPM resources against that, and it'll tell you, particularly it'll break it down by the controls and the subcontrols, and then you can apply and see your resources against that assessment and whether or not you're compliant. And it'll give you remediation steps on how to fix it to become compliant if you're not. So super helpful. And it's probably one of the best things. We saved kind of the best for last year, but it's one of the best things that is part of that Defender CSPM.
I have had customers tell me Defender CSPM is worth it for the regulatory compliance piece alone. When they need to do reporting on what is our posture against this standard, and they can click a button and get a full readout on that on everything they have in their cloud environment, that saves so much time. The investment on this is worth it, worth every penny, because it would cost them way more to do it any other way, and it would be less accurate, more error prone, and just way more headache than just getting a standard readout on it. So this is really incredible. If you have any sort of regulatory standards you need to measure yourself against, this is awesome. It's kind of comparable, if you're familiar with it, there's Compliance Manager in Microsoft 365 that does much of the same thing for that environment. This is similar in a lot of ways, where you can pick your frameworks and it will give you a readout on how your configuration lines up against it, whenever and wherever possible. And if you want to remediate it, many of them are either deep links to the actual place where you need to change it, or there's can be one-click remediations in some instances as well. So really cool stuff. I'm curious to see, and this is not having any inside knowledge on this at all, so I can just wonder out loud if we might see more consolidation in this space in the future, where maybe I could do Azure and M365 all together, although they are kind of two distinct services that have really different scope and scale. So maybe not, but in general, Microsoft has been on a journey to consolidate and simplify portals and tools over time. So maybe there's more to come in this space. And again, I literally don't know, so I am just talking out loud, but feels like that would make sense. But I will say customers who need this see a ton of value in it. And so if you are going through some sort of audit or regulatory effort to map all of your resources against these controls, maybe we just saved you a ton of time. And maybe this investment's worth every penny to you.
We went over a lot in a short period of time. So hopefully you took away something. This was a very deep overview on all the things that are included in Defender CSPM. Of course, we're going to have documentation in our show notes for any other follow-up if you'd like to dive into the docs and read about it yourself. Our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJBrewer. See you at our next episode.